The air in the Fort Bragg training facility carried tension thick enough to taste. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance stood against the cinder block wall, arms crossed, watching Bruce Lee demonstrate martial arts techniques to her soldiers. Her jaw worked slowly on a piece of gum, a habit she'd developed during stress. After 18 years of fighting for respect in a male-dominated institution, after becoming one of the first female battalion commanders in Army history, she had no patience for mystique or reputation built on Hollywood stories. What happened in the next 8 minutes would change everything she thought she knew about strength, combat, and what it really means to prove yourself. This is the story of the challenge that rocked Fort Bragg and why a decorated female commander risked her entire career on a single fight. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, October 1972. The training facility smelled of canvas mats, gun oil, and something else, the particular electricity that precedes confrontation. Bruce Lee stood near the equipment rack, his black training clothes absorbing the harsh fluorescent light that gave everything in the room a clinical quality. He had been invited here through unofficial channels, a favor for a military liaison who believed that even the most elite special forces operators could benefit from exposure to unconventional combat concepts. The session was supposed to be educational, a quiet exchange between professionals who understood violence in ways most civilians never would. But Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance had other intentions. Vance was not your typical Army officer. At 5'10" and 165 pounds of dense, functional muscle, she carried the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. But her path to battalion commander had been unlike any other officer's in Army history. She had enlisted at 18, straight out of a small farming town in Nebraska, where her father had taught her that respect was earned, not given. The Army of 1954 wasn't ready for women like Sarah Vance. They gave her a typewriter and told her to file paperwork. She had other plans. For 18 years, she fought every battle twice, once against the enemy, once against her own institution. Every promotion required her to be not just good, but exceptional. Every assignment demanded she prove herself all over again to men who saw her uniform before they saw her rank. She had survived Ranger training when women weren't officially allowed. She had led troops in combat advisory roles when women weren't supposed to be near fighting. She had commanded men who outweighed her by 50 pounds and outranked her in experience, earning their respect through sheer competence and unwavering determination. Her shoulders were broad, her forearms defined with the kind of strength that came from thousands of hours carrying equipment, climbing obstacles, and refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose on her. Scars marked her knuckles, not from bar fights, but from training exercises where she'd proved herself against soldiers who thought a woman had no business in their ranks. By 1972, she commanded a battalion of 600 soldiers. She was one of perhaps 3 women in the entire Army to hold such a position. Every day, she knew that her performance reflected on every woman trying to follow in her footsteps. Which is why Bruce Lee's presence at Fort Bragg bothered her so much. To Vance, the man on the mat was an anomaly that didn't fit into her carefully constructed worldview. A civilian, an actor who taught movie stars how to look dangerous for cameras. Someone whose reputation was built on whispered stories rather than documented performance. She had heard the rumors circulating through the special operations community that this Chinese martial artist was something different, that his speed defied conventional understanding, that he had handled multiple challenges in closed-door confrontations that never made it into official reports. But Vance had spent nearly 2 decades fighting for respect in an institution that measured worth in quantifiable terms: how much weight you could carry, how fast you could complete an obstacle course, how many consecutive push-ups you could perform. She had earned her rank through documented performance, through excelling in every metric the Army used to measure capability. Not through mystique, not through whispered stories, through results. The demonstration continued. Bruce moved through basic principles with a young female lieutenant, adjusting her stance, correcting her weight distribution, explaining the biomechanics of efficient force generation. His voice was calm, almost professorial, carrying the tone of someone who had taught these concepts so many times that explanations came automatically. His movements were economical, no wasted motion, no theatrical flourishes, no unnecessary embellishment. Just pure mechanical efficiency that spoke to years of refinement. Vance watched from her position against the wall, her analytical mind cataloging everything she saw, looking for weaknesses, identifying patterns. And she waited. When the session broke for water, Vance pushed off the wall and walked onto the mat. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, people froze in place. The 8 people present, 4 male Special Forces operators, 3 female officers, and 1 intelligence liaison, exchanged glances that communicated without words something significant was about to happen. The 3 female officers looked particularly interested, aware that their commander was about to do something that would either validate or undermine every woman trying to prove herself in this male-dominated institution. Bruce noticed her approaching but didn't react visibly. He simply stood still, a towel draped over one shoulder, his breathing unchanged, his posture relaxed. His body language revealed nothing, not anticipation, not concern, not even curiosity, just absolute presence in the moment. "So, you're the famous Bruce Lee," Vance said, stopping 6 feet away. Her voice carried the flat confidence of a woman who had commanded men in situations where hesitation meant failure, where weakness could cost lives. "I've been hearing stories all morning about what you can do." Bruce inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was polite without being deferential. "People tell many stories, Colonel. They say you're fast. They say you've beaten men twice your size." Vance paused, letting her eyes sweep over his frame in a way that was neither impressed nor dismissive, just coldly analytical, the way she might assess any piece of equipment or tactical asset. "They say you can do things that don't make sense according to conventional training methodologies." "People say many things that don't make sense according to conventional training methodologies." Bruce replied quietly, his tone matching hers, neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Vance's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm a practical woman, Mr. Lee. I've spent 18 years in an army that measures everything in quantifiable terms. Push-ups completed, miles run in specific times, obstacles cleared, weight carried over distance. Everything documented. Everything measurable. Everything replicable." She took a half step closer, reducing the distance between them. "I don't believe in mystique. I don't believe in reputation built on stories. I believe in what can be measured, tested, and replicated under controlled conditions." "Then we have something in common," Bruce said. "I also believe in what can be measured and replicated. The difference may be in what we choose to measure. Do you?" Vance's tone sharpened like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Because from where I stand, what I see is a civilian who teaches actors how to look dangerous for cameras. Someone who's never had to carry a wounded soldier out of hostile territory under fire. Someone who's never had to make split-second decisions where other people's lives depend entirely on your physical capability and mental toughness." She paused, letting the weight of her experience hang in the air between them. "I'm wondering what happens when you face someone who's actually earned their reputation through documented performance in real-world conditions. Not stories, not mystique, not Hollywood. Results." The room had gone completely silent. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. The 3 female officers looked uncomfortable. This was their commander, their role model, putting her credibility on the line in a way that would reflect on all of them, on every woman trying to prove she belonged in this world. Bruce's expression didn't change. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his weight perfectly balanced between both feet, his breathing steady and controlled. But something shifted in his eyes, a subtle sharpening of focus, like a camera lens adjusting to examine something at a different depth. The casual observer might have missed it. Those who understood combat recognized it immediately. "You're challenging me," Bruce said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of observed fact. Vance's jaw set in a hard line, muscle flexing beneath skin. "I'm offering you an opportunity. A chance to prove you're not what I think you are. To demonstrate that your reputation is built on something more substantial than carefully edited film footage and stories told by people who want to believe in something extraordinary. And what do you think I am, Colonel? I think you're a very talented performer who has convinced a lot of people that he's something more than that." The words landed with surgical precision, designed to cut. "I think women like me spend every single day proving we belong in this institution, overcoming assumptions and limitations that have nothing to do with our actual capability. And I think men like you get respect handed to them based on reputation alone, without ever having to face the kind of scrutiny we endure. Captain Rebecca Morrison, the intelligence liaison who had arranged Bruce's visit, stepped forward with her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Colonel Vance, this isn't appropriate. Mr. Lee is here as a guest, and this isn't." "It's fine, Captain," Bruce said, cutting her off with quiet authority. His voice was neither aggressive nor defensive. It carried the tone of a man accepting an invitation to dinner, not a challenge to combat. "The Colonel has questions. Questions deserve answers. And some questions can only be answered through direct experience." Vance was already removing her uniform jacket, revealing a military tank top that showed arms carved from years of functional training. Not the bulky muscle of bodybuilding, but the kind of dense, practical strength that came from actually using your body as a tool day after day. She rolled her shoulders, producing a subtle series of adjustments and cracks, and moved toward the center of the mat. Her movements were efficient, controlled, devoid of any theatrical showmanship or intimidation display. Just pure professional readiness. Bruce handed his towel to one of the female lieutenants without looking at her. He didn't stretch. He didn't warm up. He didn't assume an obvious fighting stance. He simply walked to meet Vance, stopping approximately 8 feet away. The distance was precise, close enough to engage, far enough to observe. The 8 witnesses formed a loose semicircle around them, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to something approaching dread. Vance settled into a combat stance that immediately revealed her training. Weight evenly distributed between both feet. Hands positioned for both offense and defense. Chin tucked to protect the jaw. Posture upright but not rigid. It was a stance refined through thousands of hours of combatives training and practical application. She had fought men who outweighed her by 50 pounds and won through superior technique, better tactics, and sheer determination. She began circling slowly to her left, testing the distance between them, looking for patterns in Bruce's positioning, analyzing his responses to her movement. Bruce stood almost square, his feet positioned in a way that seemed casual, almost careless to anyone who didn't understand fighting. His hands hung low and relaxed at his sides. His breathing remained unchanged, steady, controlled, measured. To Vance, it looked like either profound arrogance or complete ignorance of how real fighting worked. To those in the room who understood martial arts at a deeper level, it looked like something else entirely. A coiled spring that had learned to perfectly disguise its tension, a weapon at rest that could activate in a fraction of a heartbeat. "If you beat me," Vance said, her voice carrying across the silent room with absolute clarity, "I'll stand in front of every single soldier on this base and apologize publicly. I'll admit I was wrong about you. I'll tell them you're everything the stories claim and more." She paused, letting the weight of that promise settle. "But if I beat you, everyone knows the truth. That Bruce Lee is just another man whose reputation far exceeds his actual ability. That the legend is bigger than the reality." Bruce nodded slowly, processing not just her words, but the emotional weight behind them. The years of fighting for recognition. The constant need to prove herself. The armor she had built from necessity. "These are your terms. These are my terms. Then I accept." Vance didn't waste time with further conversation or psychological games. She had made her challenge. Terms were agreed. Now it was time for truth. She launched a straight right hand. Not a full power strike intended to cause maximum damage, but a ranging shot designed to establish distance, test reactions, and provoke a response that would reveal patterns. It was technically sound, thrown with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had been taught by skilled professionals and had refined those teachings through practical application against resisting opponents. Bruce moved. What happened next occurred so quickly that several witnesses would later struggle to describe the exact sequence of events when trying to reconstruct the moment in their memories. Bruce's upper body shifted, perhaps 3 inches to the right, no more, just enough to let Vance's fist pass harmlessly beside his jaw with perhaps a centimeter of clearance. The economy of the movement was startling. Simultaneously, as his torso was still completing that minimal evasion, his right hand shot forward in a straight vertical punch that traveled less than 12 inches from its starting position. The impact caught Vance directly on the sternum in the exact center of her chest. The effect was immediate and profoundly shocking to everyone watching. Vance's forward momentum stopped completely, as if she had run face first into an invisible barrier that materialized out of empty air. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating with surprise and something close to disbelief. The air left her lungs in a single explosive grunt that everyone heard. She staggered backward 2 steps, her hands dropping instinctively from their guard position to protect her midsection, her face registering a complex mixture of surprise, confusion, and the dawning realization that something had just happened that didn't fit into her understanding of how fights worked. Bruce hadn't moved from his original position. His hand was already back at his side, relaxed and loose, as if nothing significant had occurred. His breathing remained unchanged, steady, controlled, showing no signs of exertion. The entire exchange, from Vance's initial punch to her staggering backward, had taken less than 2 seconds. Vance blinked rapidly, trying to process what had just happened to her. She had been hit before. Hit hard by men who knew how to generate power, who had tried to use their size and strength advantage to overwhelm her superior technique and tactical intelligence. She had taken solid punches from boxers, heavy kicks from Muay Thai fighters, and brutal strikes from fellow soldiers during full contact training. But this was fundamentally different in a way that shook her confidence. The punch hadn't looked powerful. There had been no visible wind-up, no obvious hip rotation, no telegraph whatsoever that might have warned her it was coming. Yet the impact had sent a shockwave through her entire torso, reverberating through her skeletal structure like someone had swung a baseball bat directly into her chest with full force. "What the hell?" Vance muttered, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. She straightened up with visible effort, forcing her breathing back under conscious control, fighting against the instinctive response of her body that wanted to curl inward protectively. The first genuine flicker of doubt appeared in her eyes, though she quickly suppressed it through sheer force of will. She was a battalion commander in the United States Army. She had survived Ranger School. She had led troops in situations where failure meant casualties. She had overcome every obstacle the institution had placed in her path. She was not going to be intimidated by one strike from a man who weighed 30 pounds less than her. Vance reset her stance and moved forward again, this time with noticeably more caution. Her guard tighter, her movements less committed. She threw a jab, then another, testing Bruce's reactions, trying to establish a pattern she could exploit. Both punches missed by margins that seemed impossibly small, Bruce's head moving just enough to avoid contact. No more and no less. The economy of his defensive movement was genuinely unnerving, as if he had calculated the exact minimum distance required for safety and refused to waste a single millimeter of motion beyond that absolute necessity. Then Vance committed more fully, throwing a proper combination. Jab, cross, left hook, 3 punches thrown with genuine intent to land, to damage, to prove her point. These weren't tentative probing strikes. These were the techniques of a woman who had spent years learning to hold her own against larger, stronger adversaries through superior skill. Bruce slipped the jab with a subtle head movement that made it appear as though Vance had simply miscalculated her distance. He parried the cross with his left hand, redirecting it smoothly past his shoulder with what looked like casual, almost lazy ease. And the hook never arrived at its intended target, because as Vance's right hand was still retracting from the parried cross, Bruce had already stepped inside her guard and delivered a precise palm strike to the underside of her jaw. The sound echoed through the training facility, a sharp, clean crack that made everyone wince, and several people instinctively touched their own jaws in sympathetic response. Vance's head snapped backward, her knees buckled beneath her. For a prolonged moment, she seemed suspended in time, her body caught in that terrible instant between consciousness and unconsciousness, her nervous system frantically arguing with her willpower about which should have priority. Her vision went momentarily white at the edges, a familiar sensation from previous concussions, but somehow more intense, more complete. Bruce could have ended it there. Everyone in the room understood that simple truth. The opening existed. Vance's chin was fully exposed, her balance completely compromised, her guard utterly open. One more strike, properly placed with his full intent behind it, and the battalion commander would be unconscious before she hit the mat. Instead, Bruce stepped back deliberately, returning to his original position, exactly where he had started, and simply waited with infinite patience. Vance shook her head violently, trying to clear the static and ringing that had suddenly filled her skull. She tasted copper. A thin line of blood had appeared inside her mouth, where she had accidentally bitten her cheek during the impact. When her vision finally cleared and the world stopped tilting at crazy angles, she saw Bruce standing exactly where he had been before. Hands still low and relaxed, expression completely unchanged, breathing still perfectly controlled and steady. Not gloating, not aggressive, not even particularly interested. Just waiting, giving her the opportunity to continue or concede. Something fundamental shifted in Vance's expression. The professional detachment, the controlled discipline of a trained military officer who had learned to suppress emotion in favor of tactical thinking, began to crack like ice under pressure. What emerged beneath that carefully maintained surface was far more complex than simple anger or frustration. It was the accumulated weight of 18 years spent proving herself, of every time someone had doubted her capability purely because of her gender, of every obstacle she had systematically overcome through determination that bordered on obsession. Her entire identity had been meticulously constructed on a foundation of documented, measurable competence. That foundation was now being challenged by someone who operated completely outside her frame of reference, by someone whose effectiveness couldn't be adequately explained by the metrics she had spent her career mastering. She stopped thinking about proper technique. She stopped thinking about proving a tactical point. She simply needed to land one solid, clean strike on the man standing in front of her with such maddening calm. Vance moved forward with renewed intensity, throwing combinations with increasing speed and commitment, pulling from everything she had learned across nearly 2 decades of training: jab, cross sequences, left hooks to the body, right uppercuts, low kicks borrowed from Muay Thai instructors. She was synthesizing boxing, kickboxing, and military combatives into a sustained assault. Each individual technique was fundamentally sound, each movement mechanically efficient against almost any opponent on the planet. This level of sustained aggression, combined with solid technique, would have been overwhelming, would have forced them backward, would have created openings for finishing strikes. Bruce moved through her attacks like water flowing effortlessly around stones in a stream. He didn't block with forceful opposition. He redirected incoming force with minimal contact. He didn't evade with dramatic sweeping movements. He simply wasn't occupying the space where her strikes arrived. His defensive movements were so economical they appeared almost lazy, as if he was expending the absolute minimum effort necessary to achieve safety. And in the brief gaps between her combinations, his own counters found their marks with unsettling consistency. A finger jab that stopped precisely 1 inch from her eye. A palm strike that tapped her solar plexus with just enough force to interrupt her breathing rhythm. A sweep that compromised her base structure without actually taking her down to the mat. Vance realized with growing frustration and something approaching fear that she wasn't fighting a man in any conventional sense. She was fighting a principle, a living, breathing equation that had already calculated and solved her before she had thrown her first punch. Every combination she attempted, he seemed to anticipate before her muscles had finished receiving the signals from her brain. Every tactical adjustment she made, he had somehow already accounted for in his positioning. It was like fighting smoke or shadow, present and real, but impossible to pin down or control. After what felt like hours but had actually been less than 3 minutes, Vance found herself standing in the center of the mat, breathing heavily, sweat stinging her eyes. Her hands dropped to her sides in a gesture that wasn't quite surrender, but wasn't far from it. Bruce stood exactly where he had throughout the encounter. Calm, centered, showing no signs of exertion. The silence in the room was absolute. "Colonel," Bruce said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the still air, "you have nothing to prove." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What? You have nothing to prove? Not to me, not to them." He gestured toward the witnesses around them. "Not to anyone. I don't understand." Bruce stepped closer. Close enough that their conversation could remain private while still being observed by the others. "For 18 years, you have measured your worth by your ability to defeat others. To be faster, stronger, better than the men around you. You have built your identity on being exceptional at their game, by their rules." Vance's jaw tightened. "That's how the system works. That's how one system works." Bruce corrected gently. "But there are other ways to measure strength, other ways to define victory." He gestured toward her uniform jacket, lying folded on a nearby bench. "You command 600 soldiers. They follow you not because you can outfight them, but because you have earned their respect through competence, integrity, and leadership. That is a strength that cannot be measured in push-ups or obstacle course times. But if you cannot defeat me in hand-to-hand combat, what does that prove? That there is someone in the world who has trained longer and more specifically in this particular skill set. This diminishes your other accomplishments. How exactly? Vance stared at him, processing words that challenged everything she had built her career on. You think I'm weak? I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Bruce said with quiet conviction. I think you have overcome obstacles that would have broken most men. I think you have redefined what it means to be a soldier, a leader, a woman in uniform. He paused. But I also think you have been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. The burden of proving that women belong in the military. That burden belongs to the institution, not to you individually. If I don't prove it, who will? You already have. Your rank proves it. Your soldiers' respect proves it. Your 18 years of documented excellence proves it. One sparring match changes none of that. For a long moment, Vance said nothing. Around them, the witnesses waited in respectful silence, understanding that something significant was happening beyond the physical confrontation they had expected to see. Finally, she spoke. I've spent so long fighting to prove I belong that I forgot why I wanted to belong in the first place. Bruce nodded. Fighting for your place is different from fighting from your place. One comes from insecurity. The other comes from strength. And you think I should fight from my place? I think you already are. You just haven't recognized it yet. Vance looked around the room at the 7 other people present, her soldiers, her peers, her subordinates. For the first time in years, she saw something in their faces she hadn't noticed before, respect that had nothing to do with her ability to match them in physical combat. Colonel, said Captain Morrison, the intelligence liaison, for what it's worth, every person in this room would follow you into combat without hesitation. Not because of what you just did or didn't do here, but because of who you are as a leader. The 3 female officers nodded in agreement. One of them, a young lieutenant who had been taking notes throughout Bruce's demonstration, spoke up. Mom, you're the reason I believed I could make it through officer training. Not because you're the strongest or the fastest, but because you showed me what quiet confidence looks like. Vance felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She turned back to Bruce. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing, Colonel. But you might consider what you owe yourself. What do you mean? Permission to be human. Permission to not be perfect. Permission to define strength on your own terms rather than constantly reacting to other people's definitions. She extended her hand. Bruce shook it firmly. Thank you, she said, for the lesson I didn't know I needed. Thank you, Bruce replied, for the honor of meeting a true warrior. Years later, after Bruce Lee's death shocked the world, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance would remember him not as a movie star or martial arts icon, but as a quiet voice in a training facility saying words that changed her life. You have nothing to prove. It was the most important lesson she ever learned. October 1972, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 8 witnesses to a confrontation that proved strength comes in forms the military doesn't quantify. The day a female battalion commander learned that the greatest victories aren't about defeating others. They're about discovering who you already are. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one who no longer feels the need to prove it.